Welcome to the Savvy Dentist Podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Welcome back to the Savvy Dentist Podcast, the show where great dentistry meets great business. It's Jesse Green here at the control panels as always, and today we're having a conversation about leadership. And leadership is important in any particular business, and my guest today, Scott Stein, is an absolute master at it. He has helped literally thousands of leaders around the world and is really focusing on helping them implement fast-track strategies to improve results. Many of you will know Scott through his work as in the thought leadership space. He's an international speaker, best-selling author. He's published a gazillion books, and most recently he's published a book called Leadership Hacks, which is what we're going to really cover in today's conversation. Before we do get into that conversation, just a couple of public service announcements. For those people who are new to our podcast, welcome. It's wonderful to have you here. For those people who have been here before, welcome back. It's also great to have you here. And if you've not yet joined us in the Savvy Dentist Facebook group, please do come along and find us there. We've got some training, tools, and tips and tricks there for you to make your business really flourish. And you can find that at drjessegreen.com/Facebook. And equally, you might want to download the Savvy Dentist app, which you can get from your app store of choice, whether it's the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store. And in that space, we have lots of free content and some resources that will be coming down the pipeline very shortly. So please do find us there. Now, as I said, our guest today, Scott Stein, is an absolute legend, a real rock star when it comes to leadership. He's sought after by the highest of echelons of business. And Scott, thank you so much for taking your time out of your day to come and hang with us.
No worries. And thanks for that wonderful introduction. Jeez, sounds pretty impressive.
Yeah, well, you are impressive, mate. I've seen your work for a while now, and we're talking off air a moment ago. I've read your books and come across your stuff before. So it's really... What I really like about your work, it's immensely practical and it's implementable and it makes a difference in the real world. So I want to talk a bit about that, particularly through the lens of leadership. But before we do discuss the nitty-gritty of leadership, I wanted to ask you about leadership in itself, because we live in a world now where there's high levels of distrust in some of our institutions, and leadership seems to be a conversation. When you listen to the news, people always say it was a lack of leadership here or a lack of leadership there. Why is it that you think that leadership has been lacking in some of these organizations for a while?
Yeah, I think there's a massive transition right now. So if you take a look at everything that's going on, we all know about the digital world and everything's going to smaller, faster, lots of uncertainty. I think because of that, a lot of leaders are making what I call knee-jerk reactions. They're not really listening to their intuition, and I think they're not being smart with their time either. And because of that, I think we do have a bit of a lack of leadership.
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it? We're just coming out of an election here in Australia, and leadership has been a topic of conversation in that space for a while. What do you think are the essential ingredients of good leadership then? You know, we see bad leadership and we recognize it pretty immediately. But what are the elements that make up a good leader, and what does good leadership look like?
Yeah, I think there's really three main things that separate a great leader from a really average leader. And one of them is around the awareness that they have around these three things. The first one is their mindset. I notice, and I've worked with many great leaders, either of ASX 100 or even small businesses and practices, you know, where there's the one person like a dentist or somebody else that's running the business. And regardless, one of the things I notice is what's going on with their mindset. And is their mindset positive, supportive, looking for opportunities, or is their mindset one of overwhelm, of dread, and just struggling mentally just to keep up with everything? And I think that's one of the key ingredients. Some of the great leaders actually keep a positive, focused mindset. They take time to recharge their batteries, which means they can make smarter decisions.
So for those people listening to the podcast who'll say, yeah, I understand mindset's important. I know that I've got to recharge my batteries. Developing a positive mindset, a growth mindset, is something that takes time and patience and work. Are there any particular things that you would recommend for people to start working on their mindset and think, okay, if I'm going to be a bit more effective leader, if I'm going to be able to take my business, my team, my life to the next level, I know that I've got to up my game in this space. What sort of things might they consider?
Yeah, I think one of the big ones is what's going on with their energy. I'm noticing a really big common trend, which is a lack of energy. Everybody's so exhausted, they feel overwhelmed, and they're not taking the mental breaks or the physical breaks that they need to recharge. And I think that's an important thing. For somebody that's, running a business, they need to take that time just to fill up their batteries. And usually they have the excuse, I can't afford to take a break, right? And they just keep performing at 120%. And eventually what I find is their decision-making and their approach starts to stall. And they actually start hitting a bit of a wall. So I think that's one of the strategies they can use. I think the second thing they can do is surround themselves with people that will help support and challenge them. And it could be getting involved in a community where you go in with like minds that challenge you about how you're operating your business or your practice. Or you go and attend a conference that shows some of the leading edge strategies that you might be able to grab to help improve your leadership, your influence, and your approach.
I really like that. And on lots of levels, I think many of the people I know work really hard for really long periods of time and then collapse in a heap particularly on a Friday night. They'll fall over and go, oh, great, I'll sit on the sofa and watch the footy for an hour or two and fall into bed. And that's great. And I'm all for enjoying your Friday evenings. But I think looking beyond that, scheduling those breaks, planning for it and looking after yourself, and I think understanding that unless you grow, the business won't grow. And if we're trying to sprint the whole way, it's going to end in tears. I also really liked your thoughts around surrounding yourself with a peer group that's going to challenge you and lift you. When it comes to leadership, what sort of skills do you think someone really needs to focus on learning? You mentioned energy management and time efficiency. How do you go about enhancing those sorts of things?
Yeah, and I think one thing you mentioned, I'm very practical. So I don't like pie in the sky theory things.
Me
but
neither.
what I know that works, one of the things that I know that works is when people are focused on what activity that they actually spend their time on. And there's a great activity I talk about in the book, and anybody can do it. Any of you listening right now could do this easily. You just take a clean sheet of paper or an iPad, and you just actually visually map your current role. What's your current activity been for the last week or two? Right? So you just do a little bit of a mind map to look at what are all the areas of focus or responsibility where you've put your time. Once you've mapped it, the next step is to actually do percentage of time. What percentage of time is on this area versus another area versus another area? And then from a business leadership perspective, or even a small business ownership perspective, take a look at which things are you doing are working in the business, which are kind of the day-to-day tasks, versus on the business, which are the tasks that are going to help you get and grow beyond where your business currently is. And that's kind of where you are currently. The second part of the exercise is to then map ideally where would you be focusing. So take a clean sheet of paper or a clean note in your iPad and go, all right, ideally, where would I be focusing my time? What amount of it would be in the business and what amount of it would be on the business? And what I find is when people start mapping it, especially when they do percentage of time, that's usually the challenge.
Yeah.
Because they're not aware of where they're spending their time. But when they map out what have I currently been doing the last couple of weeks, and then what ideally should I be doing, they can actually start seeing what they need to do different. And then I call that develop their transition plan. So what are the areas that you're going to spend more time or less time on to help you improve your efficiency? And this is one of my biggest leadership hacks, which is around how do you actually hack what activity you're doing and start being smarter about the activity you're doing rather than just going through the motions.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the challenges that will come up in that is when you're thinking about all the things you want to do more of or less of, or perhaps even stop altogether, there's going to be an element of delegation required, perhaps. And one of the challenges that I hear regularly is, why won't people just do what I ask them to do? Or the other thing that comes up is, if I delegate this, no one does it to the level that I want it done. So I'm sure that's a fairly common frustration for small business owners. Could you just speak to that point for a second?
Yeah, I think it's a massive issue. The inability of small business owners or managers to delegate. In fact, there was an article in the Harvard Business Review a couple of years ago that found almost 50% of companies surveyed were concerned about their managers' ability to delegate. So we know it's a massive issue. you kind of hit the nail on the head, which is why don't small business owners or leaders delegate? And the number one reason is this myth that I can do it myself faster.
Mm.
And to be fair, most people can, but the challenge is, especially if you're in a small business, if you want to grow your business and leverage your time, you need to develop the skills of the people around you and start training them so you can delegate it.
Yeah.
So in the book, I talk about there's 4 levels of delegation. And that the highest level at the very top is what I call level 4. And level 4 delegation is the biggest mistake that most leaders or small business owners make. Level 4 delegation is I just go to you and I say, Jesse, I need you to do this.
Yep.
And I assume that you know exactly what I mean by that. I assume that you know the steps to problem solve and project management that are in my head. And I assume that you're going to do it in the time frame I want and at the quality standard I want.
Yes.
And that's the biggest mistake.
Yeah.
And what I find is most small business owners or leaders, they'll do that once or twice with the staff member. And then they will go from level 4, which is the highest level, all the way to the very bottom, which I call level 1, which is, you know what? Don't do it. I'm going to take it back. And they stop delegating.
Mm.
And this is an unconscious pattern that a lot of small business owners or leaders get into.
And
And to me, that's dangerous because I'm going, well, wait a minute. You're paying staff to do these things, but because of your inability to delegate, you keep taking the task back on your plate.
yeah, absolutely.
And you can't really point at the staff. That means you've got the issue with how you should be delegating.
So do you think that comes about because a lot of small businesses start with the person being a technician? So in our case, a clinical dentist.
Yes.
And they're quite good at their craft.
Yeah.
And they, at some point, figure out they want to get off the tools, to use that terminology. And so they start to bring other people on to support them in that role. And therefore, that's when some of the challenges of delegation occur because they're actually very good at their craft and they want other people who they're delegating things to be equally good at their craft.
Yeah, I think that's a common pattern. In fact, when I grew up, my mother was a dental receptionist.
Mm-hmm.
And she's done that for 40 years. She just recently retired. And I remember growing up and she would work for a new dentist and he had the ability to delegate and his practice would grow. It'd expand. He'd bring other dentists in. They'd have a strong practice. You know, and over time, she might work for somebody else and they could never actually grow their practice.
Mm.
And I remember going in and talking with them. And even over time, I would talk with them. And what I found is a common theme. The ones that could grow their practice did know how to delegate.
Yeah.
The ones that didn't, those are the ones that struggled and would complain that their staff just won't do what they want them to.
So, Scott, here's my question for you, because I know someone listening to this podcast somewhere is going to be asking the question about in the business versus on the business. Do you think it's possible for a technical type of business, so someone who's a dentist in this case, or you could use any other type of profession, you know, lawyer, doctor, whatever, do you think it's possible for them to totally get off the tools? And if it is, what would be some of those key first steps?
Yeah, I think it is possible. And the thing is, this is why I like mapping out the ideal role. What would you ideally be doing?
Yeah.
Because I know that some people, some dentists, they love still being on the tools. They just don't want to be on the tools as much as they are right now.
Exactly.
So I think it's about what percentage of time and having a good strategy to transition over. And one of the best strategies they can use, and this is in the delegation model, is rather than go to level 4, level 1, go to what I call level 2.
Yeah.
Level 2 delegation is where you sit down with that staff member, you map it on a sheet of paper, and you start with an ask. It's not a tell. You're not going to tell them, oh, I want you to do this, this, and this. It's an ask. It's, I need your help with this task. And what I want to do is let's map out the steps together because I have an idea of how it should be done, but I want to see what ideas you have. And let's map them. And you just ask the question and create a bit of a mind map and map out, all right, here's the task, and here are all of the activities that need to be taken to accomplish that task.
Mm.
And it's more of an ask, but you're mapping it on paper and you're adding the value based on your experience of what you want them to do as well. The next piece of this is then you actually sequence it, which again is, all right, maybe there's 6 or 7 different things that need to be done. You ask them, all right, what do you think you need to do first? Then second, then third, and you write the order down on the sheet of paper or on the iPad.
Yep.
What this does is it shows the person that you're delegating to exactly what needs to be done, and more importantly, the sequence or the order that it needs to be done in.
Yeah.
So this way, there is no misunderstanding. We're both on the same page. And the other piece I like to put in it is a check-in.
Yeah.
And a check-in is just saying, all right, let's say there's 7 steps. How about why don't you take the activity on steps 1 and 2, and then let's check back in. Show me what you've come up with, because there might be something else I forgot to pass on to you, an email or some other information. And then I'll make sure that you're still on track.
Yep.
Right. And what I find, the minute leaders or small business owners go to level 2 in delegation, the relationship shifts. The reason why is they're starting to coach and mentor their people, but they're also giving them the opportunity to step up. Most employees and staff relish that opportunity. A lot of people get really bored at work because they're going through the same thing over and over again, and they want an opportunity to step up and demonstrate what they're capable of.
Yeah.
And by going to level 2, this allows you to actually develop their skills and help them actually make that transition.
I think that's really wonderful. And on top of that, you're building an intellectual property asset into your practice as well. So that,
correct.
If someone else comes along.
They can then, over time, train the next staff member that comes in using the same process, which is really what I call kind of the level 3 in delegation, is you get them and work them up to a level. And this happened with me. I had a conference and team building business in Sydney. And this is 25 years ago. We expanded really quick. And we got a staff member that was further north at a resort. And I started doing level 2 delegation. I would map it. And she loved it. She responded really well. And it was great because she was a go-getter, but she was not a detailed or an organization person.
Yeah.
So once we started mapping it, her performance really improved. And the results she started getting were amazing. And what I did to get her at level 3 is I said, can you do me a favor? Rather than me sitting down with you and mapping this, can you map it on your own? Map out what needs to be done on one sheet of paper and then show me. Yeah. Because there might have been something I can add value to, and then you can actually take action on it. And that's what level 3 is. Level 3 is about them mapping the plan, showing you, and then them taking action, and then you still having a check-in along the way.
Yeah.
And when your staff performing that level, things really start to change as far as performance and momentum in your business or your practice.
Ladies and gents, if you've just joined us on the podcast, we're having a conversation with Scott Stein, and Scott has shared some absolute pearls of wisdom, some real gems. And I'm going to encourage you to go back and just listen to the last 3 or 4 minutes over and over again, because what Scott has really laid out for you very succinctly is a practical step-by-step guide to delegation. And when you can delegate, you can free up your time and get on to other tasks that bring more value to the business or more fulfillment for you at the same time. And if you want to find out more about the book that Scott's referring to called Leadership Hacks, you can check that out at scottstein.com. I'd really encourage you to get hold of it. Scott, thinking about delegation is obviously really critical. One of the things that I'm curious to ask as well is, as leaders in our business, it's important for us to show up at our best, of course. And you've already mentioned the importance of taking a physical and mental break. But in terms of showing up at our best, what else do we need to consider that we might want to embrace or take on so that we can be our best for our team?
Yeah, I think there's a couple other really important characteristics. We started with talking about what makes a great leader, and I said one of them was about their mindset. There's 2 other elements that I've found as well that really create leaders that people would walk over cut glass for. One of the other things is their approach. The approach is, all right, how do they approach their people? And it's kind of a really simple thing that I look at. Do they tell, do they show, or do they ask? Because quite often, individuals get into the process of just telling their staff all the time.
Yeah.
And when that happens, staff start feeling as if they're not appreciated and not valued. And one of the easy strategies to shift on your approach is do more showing and more asking to get those staff members engaged and also involved. So I think that's a really important piece, which is what is your approach on how you're communicating with your staff? And the third area is really about your impact, right? What impact are you having on them? It's interesting. You can watch the dynamics, especially if you're in a small practice in a small office. And I remember my mother talking about one of the dentists that had joined the practice. And it was interesting because the staff had their own terminology for him. It wasn't very positive.
I'm sure.
Because it was what they called the psychic vampire. And they just shortened it. Is the vampire in? Right. And the reason why is the impact that this particular dentist had on all the staff was negative, because the minute he would show up to work in the morning, he would belittle people. He would talk down to them. and he wasn't aware of the impact he was having on them and their culture in the office.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember, it got so bad that the other dentist in the practice actually had to have almost a little mini intervention. But unfortunately, he couldn't change his approach and his impact. So essentially, they asked him to leave, which to me is a shame, because that lack of being aware of the impact I'm having on people is massive for any small business owner.
Yeah, and again, because most people work in small to medium teams, and when you've got one person who's behaving in that manner and having that kind of negative impact, it does ripple through the whole team, and it's hard to insulate the team against that. And of course, the culture is hard to preserve. If you've worked hard to build a good culture, you really need to excise that kind of attitude. I guess one of the things I also wanted to really explore in our conversation today was the fact that, or you mentioned earlier, that things are changing. We're very well aware of the digitalization of the world in which we live. And of course, as a result of that, our approach needs to change. My thinking or my question really is, what of the old approach do you think is outdated and could be discarded? And where do you see the future going in terms of business, but of course, what that means for the leadership team?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges is we're so overwhelmed with information that I think a lot of leaders are just switching off to the information, which means they're getting overloaded. They're kind of seeing it and experiencing it, but they don't know how to decipher what information is going to be valuable and what isn't. And I think that's a new skill. They need to find strategies on how do I make sure that the technology that's there doesn't control me. We need to get leaders to start taking charge of the technology, right? Rather than the technology dictating what they're focusing on and what they're doing. Too many managers they're sucked into inboxes and emails. And what that means is they're constantly being bombarded, which means they're not limiting the amount of information that's coming in. And what I'm finding is they're becoming numb and they're actually not making smart decisions. If you look at the increase in sick leave, the increase in mental health issues, I think a lot of that is because they're not controlling the information and the use of technology. And that's a massive thing that leaders have to get their heads across.
So this is probably a little bit off topic, but it's a bit of a pet topic for me, and that is overuse of social media and the constant on of social media, checking alerts, checking likes and status updates, or whatever it happens to be. And I realize this is a little bit tangential, but where do you see, I suppose, addiction to those sorts of platforms forming a part in that lack of control around technology?
Yeah, this is a big one. And there's lots of new research starting to come out on it. But one thing I also look at is, what is the research from the past show?
Yeah.
In the 1950s, there's a really famous experiment done by Olds and Milner. And what they did is they put electrodes on the brains of rats to stimulate the part of the brain that released dopamine whenever the rat pressed the lever.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, again, we as humans, we actually react the same way to this little hit of dopamine in our brain.
Yeah.
And what they found is the dopamine became so addictive to these rats, some of them would press the lever up to 700 times per hour.
Wow.
Right? Because that little hit, that little dopamine, that little tick the box that feels a little bit good. And what the research is showing is our addiction to checking email and social media has the same hit of dopamine in the brain. So it makes us feel good, but what that does is it creates what I see a negative loop or a negative pattern of interaction where people are constantly checking their social media just to check it to get that hit of dopamine, not to be effective or productive on it. And I think that's the big issue.
I think it's a massive issue, actually. And certainly in my own life, I've really restricted my use of social media. And many listeners will see that I've not been as active on social media as I would have been in the past. And it's for exactly that reason. It's about taking control over my time and not reacting to my phone alerts or anything of that nature, and trying to use the technology rather than it trying to use me. So I guess if you were to look over the shoulder of some of the business owners with whom you've interacted and you could tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, there's a better way. What sort of better way would you commonly be exploring or explaining to them?
Yeah, I think one of the things that there's a great best-selling author. His name's Kevin Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote a book, 15 Secrets Successful People Know About Time Management.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fascinating book. He's a New York Times bestseller because what he did is he kind of interviewed billionaires and entrepreneurs and Olympic athletes and said, what do they do to manage their time? And he found a process. He calls it the 3-2-1-0 approach. And what the 3-2-1-0 approach is, he advocates that you only schedule to check your inbox or do social media 3 times per day.
Yep.
It could be morning, middle of the day, and end of the afternoon or evening.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the 3 is. The 21, he recommends setting your phone and the timer on your phone to 21 minutes, a countdown timer. And essentially, that's the limit of the amount of time you can spend.
Okay.
And the goal, of course, is to get through your email inbox or your social media updates, and by the end of that 21 minutes, that's it, you stop.
Yep.
Right? And I think that's a great little game that you can play. Now, I know some people, they go, well, I could maybe do that with my social media, but not my email. I'm going, all right, well, check your email, make it a 5-2-1-0.
Yeah.
Schedule the time so you're in control of the time, not the time and the digital communication being in control of you.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, because dentists would probably spend a lot of their day hands in mouth, so they might be checking their email or social media between patients, or sometimes not at all. Can you give me, just as a reference point outside of dentistry, can you give me an indication of the scale of that particular problem?
Yeah, I think it's massive.
Yeah.
It's across industries. So I do work in not-for-profit. I was just in America in Tucson and did some work with a group out there, Habitat for Humanity, great organization. And they're saying the same thing. We're just getting sucked into this. I do some work with some of the big banks in the financial services industry, the automotive industry. And what I'm finding, it's across industries and it's actually across levels.
Yeah.
So it's CEOs down to frontline staff that are kind of getting more challenged with how do I manage this time and not get sucked in. And I'm not perfect either. Like I've gone onto Facebook and half an hour has gone by in a blink of a minute.
Yep.
And suddenly I'm going, geez, I just lost that time.
Yeah.
And I think that's the important thing, to be aware, to make sure that you are managing your time for the things that are important.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That awareness is key. So if we can take charge of our electronic devices, that's obviously going to go a long way to helping us get more done and be productive, to be efficient. What else could we think about in terms of getting stuff done? There's a never-ending list of things to do. We've spoken about delegation. We've spoken about looking at our electronic devices and taking charge of that. What else do you think business owners should be thinking about in terms of efficiency, getting things done, and productivity?
Yeah, I think one other thing is about when you send emails. And there's an email send hack that I talked about. Because quite often, if you're sending an email, it's because you want somebody to do something with it.
Yep.
And I've seen some emails where they go on and on and on and on and on, and I only read the first paragraph, and I stop reading.
Yes.
I'm just not interested anymore. So I think one strategy you can use, if you're going to send an email to a staff member, a supplier, a customer, a business partner, an opportunity, is be aware of the outcome that you want them to have. And what I've found, there are one of 5 outcomes for any email that you ever send. So if you think of any email that you've received,
yes,
usually you have one of 5 outcomes. One is an FYI. Just want you to be aware of this information.
Yep.
The second one is I need to gather something from you.
Yes.
The third is I need you to make a decision. The fourth is I need you to take action. Here's the specific action you need to take. And the fifth is we need to meet, because trying to communicate everything in email isn't going to do it justice.
Yeah.
So one strategy you can use, especially when you're communicating with other people, is let them know at the very beginning, either in the subject line or at the very first couple lines of the email, what is the outcome that you need this reader that's receiving the email to take? And the other thing you can do is you can visually give your emails texture. So what that means is, rather than just doing what I call a flat email where you just bang out a whole bunch of lines, put titles in.
Okay.
Use the bullets and the indentation. Underline it. Use bold.
Yeah.
Just like the way that newspapers are written, they're written so the titles and everything grab our eyes. Email is the same. If you format it, it makes it easier for people to read it, understand it. And what I find is they appreciate it.
Yeah.
So when they get an email from you, they know exactly what they need to do with it. And it makes sense to them rather than them wasting their time trying to read through.
Yeah. I really, really love that idea. And again, it's very practical, very useful. Interestingly enough, as you were talking about email hacks, I was reflecting back on my days as a dentist in the Navy, and I was the head of the department, the medical department, and I used to get a gazillion different emails each day, and most of them were irrelevant to me. And my email triage system at the time, I'm embarrassed to tell you this, Scott, but it sounds really bad, but it turned out to be really effective. And I'm not necessarily advocating this, but it might bring a smile to your face. And that was every email that came in, unless it was from a person who I knew directly and who would only email if there was a specific reason, but there was hundreds of others that weren't like that, I would just ignore them. And I would literally put them into an archive folder, and I would run the thought process that if it's really important, they'll email me again. And surprisingly, I reckon every 100 emails that I put into the archive file, maybe 2 needed me again.
Yeah, it's a massive area that needs to be hacked.
Yeah.
Like I remember there was a McKinsey Global Institute report that showed spent on average 2.6 hours per day reading and answering emails. That's a lot of lost time. And one of the strategies, one of the hacks that I found that some people use, and it's a really simple 4-step hack. The first thing they do is they just scan through it, right?
Yep.
And then the second step is they delete.
Yes.
They just get rid of it. Get rid of it. It's not important. If it's really important, they will recontact you and then sort.
Yes.
Then go through the priority emails that are left and then, of course, respond.
Yeah.
Right? Most people just kind of unconsciously start at the top of their inbox and go down.
Yeah.
Right? And they click on everyone, read everyone. No. Scan and delete.
Yes. I just got to the point where I'd select them and move them out. And it was really cathartic as well because I was getting to zero inbox, which was nirvana.
And unusual as well.
Yes, and unusual. I've got a little bit of work to go to get back to zero inbox now, but I'm listening to myself say that. I'm going, I think I might reintroduce that system.
It's a great system. Again, any little leadership hack that you can find that helps get you more time, use it.
Yeah. What about meetings? Because again, going back to my military days, and I'd be called into any number of meetings where I was mainly there as an observer rather than a contributor. And I know some staff members or team members might feel that they're observing and not contributing. What are the elements of a leader being able to run an effective meeting, do you think?
Yeah, I think, and I talk about this in the book as well, one of the biggest challenges, and everybody's been to a meeting that's been a complete waste of time.
Yeah.
You know, it happens over and over again.
And we've probably run some as well, to be honest with you. If we're honest with ourselves. Yeah, me too.
The reason why is there's 4 different types of meetings, and each of them has a different methodology. Right. And when we don't know which type of meeting to have, we combine them. And that's when it's a waste of time. So the 4 different types of meetings. And it's really important to be, well, if I'm going to have a meeting, which of these 4 types is it? Because each of them has a different methodology. The first one is just what I call a reporting or checking meeting.
Yep.
That's just a whip around. All right, let's do a report and update just to check in. The second one is a problem solving meeting. All right, somebody's got an issue. Somebody's got a problem. We need to get some heads together and fix it. The third is a decision-making meeting, which is we've got all the information. We've looked through all the data. We need to get together and we need to discuss, debate, and make a decision. And then the final one is what I call a strategy development meeting, which is really about working on the business and thinking about the future, not the here and now.
Yeah.
So if you want to be more effective with your meetings, be aware of which type of meeting you want to have and the outcome. The drama that I find is when somebody decides to have a reporting check-in meeting and then they try and put in a problem-solving meeting and a decision meeting all at the same time. And then half of the people in the room are going, well, I can't give you any value on the problem-solving and I'm not involved in making this decision anyways, but you want me here.
Yeah.
Right? Which means it's wasting my time.
Yeah, totally.
So being very, very clear on which of those 4 types of meetings you want to have will definitely help make it more effective and more efficient.
And if you were going to run a meeting rhythm around that, would you, if you were having a team meeting once a week or something like that, would you run one of those meetings for 1 week of the month, or is that overly simplistic?
Yeah, I think you can. Like quite often I've worked with people where they've kind of restructured it, where they might just have a weekly reporting and check-in meeting.
Yep.
And what they do, and that can be 20 minutes, half an hour. It doesn't have to be massive.
No.
But what they then do is they go, if there are some issues, who's got an issue and which people would you like to stay back for another 20 minutes or 30 minutes to actually have a separate problem-solving meeting.
Okay.
So what they do is they break it up. So they let the group of people go after the end of the reporting and check-in meeting, and the people that might need to stay for the problem-solving, and they kind of start a separate meeting. And it could be back-to-back after the first one.
Sure.
But what it does is it maximizes the time and actually fulfills the need of the people that have it.
Yeah, I think that's really wonderful. And ladies and gents, again, I'd really encourage you to go back and listen to the last 3 or 4 minutes around meetings in particular, because I know one of the banes of existence for many dentists is feeling that a team meeting is a waste of time, a loss of production. And of course it is if you're not getting an outcome. So it's about being outcome focused and constructing the meeting to achieve it. So again, I think that's wise words from Scott there. Scott, we've covered a fair bit of territory. We've gone uphill, down dale, and upside down, inside out into a couple of these issues. What I wanted to ask you is that if you had any particular pearls of wisdom or gospel, according to Scott, that you want to impart with the audience before we wrap up, what would those 10 commandments or 3 commandments or 2 commandments or even 1 commandment be when it comes to leadership? What sort of advice would you offer?
Yeah, I think that the first one is make sure that you are consciously aware of what you're doing, your approach and your impact on your people.
Yep.
The great leaders that I've seen, regardless if they're small business or large multinationals, those great leaders have a high level of self-awareness. They're aware of how they're impacting and approaching their people, and they're constantly evaluating that. So I think that's one piece. I think the second piece is make sure that you take time for yourself. You know, we talked earlier about how overwhelmed everybody are, how much distraction there is. And geez, if you don't take care of yourself, it's hard to make anything else happen.
Again, really wise words. Ladies and gents, I think, again, just please copy that down and take action on that, because nothing changes if nothing changes. Scott, as I said, you've been really generous with your time today, and I want to say thank you because of all the things you could be doing. You've chosen to be here with us today, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to come and talk to us. For those people who would like to find out more about what Scott does in terms of his work and books he's written, head across to his website, scottstein.com, and there is an absolute treasure trove of goodies there. I've trawled through that website many times, and I promise you there's some wonderful resources there that I'd really encourage you to check out. Scott, once again, thank you. Your wisdom, your generosity is really profound, and from all of us here, we're deeply grateful.
No worries. Thanks. And I appreciate being here, and good luck.
Thank you, mate.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green. For more free tools and resources, join the free Facebook group. Visit drjessegreen.com/Facebook. And for more episodes, visit drjessegreen.com/savvydentist.